So now we're excited to introduce Michael Casey to the stage. Michael, good morning.
Hey, James. Good to see
How
you.
are you? Good to see you. Floor is your
Uh,
side.
Where am I coming from?
No, I said the floor is yours.
Oh, the floor is mine. Fantastic. Oh, that was just tremendous hearing from Diego. Yeah, Quark ID. That sounds very exciting. So you guys who don't know me, I'm a journalist. I until recently was the chief content officer at CoinDesk, where I was for 4 years. I'm still the chairman of Consensus, which you're all openly invited to come and be at May 29th and 31st. So I've been involved in, writing and covering crypto for about, I don't know, 12 years now. And I think I've been invited because my journey into it really came via Argentina. So I think I'm here to give you guys a bit of a perspective. Am I just talking off the top of my head here, James? Are you going to ask me some questions?
We can do either. It was slightly impromptu with Diego, but
All
I'm
right.
also happy to play the journalist, although that is very much
Cool.
your bag.
Feel free to interrupt. I've got a few words, a few things I wanted to say, so maybe just interrupt as you go, and that might be the best way to do it. So essentially, I was the bureau chief for Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal for 6 years between 2003 2009, and that was the period in which Argentina was going through its debt restructuring, and it was a drawn-out, painful, absolutely ridiculously obsessive affair. Nestor Kirchner was in power, and it was brutal. Basically, it was the biggest bankruptcy in history at the time, and eventually, through that process, I witnessed Argentina go from the deflationary problem of its crisis in 2001 to the return of inflation in sort of 2008, 2009 as I was leaving. I started to sort of think hard about why it could never get out of its cycle of just constant, you know, financial crisis, which translates into political crisis, and sort of understood fairly early on that there was just a breakdown of trust, that the sort of covenant between the government and its people was broken. And so, I really agree with Diego that they have to fix things like the foreign exchange problem and taxes. I came to believe that it seemed like an entrenchable problem because it was something far deeper than that any single party could control. It didn't matter whether you were from the left or the right. Argentina had created this broken political system with the Peronists operating like a machine in the middle of it that was always going to default back to this system because nobody trusted the actual mechanism of government, and that would then translate into a mistrust in the currency, which would ultimately then lead to financial crisis of some form, whether it's deflation or inflation, and the whole system would start all over again. Anyone that was coming into power would then have to tax. So this is the other problem that Diego is talking about, to try to then recoup the money and just act like a gatekeeper. And the only real incentive to be a politician in that situation was to be corrupt. So it just struck me as like, this is helpless. I don't know what to do about it. I loved Argentina. I had the strongest friends, the strongest bonds I've ever formed anywhere in Argentina. And I don't think that's a coincidence that when you live in a place where the civil society is so broken, that you form instead these strong bonds, these strong personal bonds. So anyway, that was my perspective. I spent 6 wonderful years there, but left because I just didn't want to live in that kind of broken, sort of dysfunctional system. I didn't want my kids growing up in it. Then I had to try to move my money out of the country because I had owned an apartment. And if anyone wants to listen to the full story here, it's on the podcast I did with Aaron Stanley a week ago. Some of you have seen this, talking about this traumatic experience, which was a very real, my own personal experience of what it's been like to be an Argentine who have to deal with this all the time. So I really have a deep understanding. I understood as well this idea that Argentines are extremely innovative around this particular problem because they had to be. In the same way they formed these strong human bonds, they would find very creative ways to use those bonds of trust to move money around and to get around the system because there was no other way to operate. And the word I used there of trust was the key point, that this was about, if you couldn't trust the system, you had to trust someone else. And that's what our money system is, right? Money is a system that inherently requires some form of trust. So fast forward to 2013, I'm a columnist for the Wall Street Journal in New York, and I wrote a piece about Bitcoin because it had suddenly popped on the radar because of the Cyprus crisis that was happening at the time. And then I get a phone call from Jeremy Allaire, now Circle, saying, look, that was a pretty ordinary column you wrote. Why don't you come in and have dinner with a few other of us people in the space and other journalists? Barry Silbert was there, Mickey Balker, Raj Date was formerly the head of the CFBP. So there were these sort of proven entrepreneurs, VCs, and a Democrat who'd been working for Elizabeth Warren of all people. And I was like, wow, this is actually not just a crazy idea. There are some real people behind this. But then at some point, somebody explained to me how a broken financial system, I think it was Barry Silbert, such as Argentina's, could work, in which the money no longer had to be deferring to the trust in the government, and that a protocol, a mathematical system, would actually run it. And I just went, that was it. That's how I understood Bitcoin. I think it's one of the reasons why people say, look, if you're an Argentine or a Venezuelan or a Lebanese or a Turk, you get it. And Americans don't necessarily, because you have to understand how the system breaks. And when it breaks, this is the sort of thing that needs. And so that was it. I was down the rabbit hole, and I wrote a book about Bitcoin with Paul Vigna called The Age of Cryptocurrency. It came out in 2015. I was so far down the rabbit hole, I left the journal and went to MIT for 4 years, where I started to engage with a lot more Argentines in the space. A guy called Martin Weinstein, if you may know, worked with me on projects up there, and started to see all these Argentine entrepreneurs and innovators come through. Folks from Ripio, Diego from RSK, and so many more, and realizing that as well, Argentina had this unique situation, I think quite different from, say, El Salvador or even Venezuela. You have this core of very well-educated, smart, and technically savvy people, certainly there in Capital, who can take these ideas, have learned the challenges of finance and translate it into something new. So I'm not at all, having gone through that journey, I am not at all surprised that Argentina has emerged as one of the big players in this space. But like everybody, I've been disappointed that it hasn't gone further, or that anywhere hasn't gone that further. So I'm excited for how this new opportunity and what you guys are building, can present itself in the context of a new government. I think it's really important that it's being framed as it is, as a way to reinvent the financial infrastructure. I think El Salvador may have had to do what it had to do, is sort of like the in your face, we're going to screw you, this is Bitcoin or nothing, battle with the IMF, etc. And that's worked out for them. But I think a far better strategy here is to think about this as infrastructure, working into a self-sovereign identity program. I've just written a book, by the way, with Frank McCourt, about the need to control our data. It's called Our Biggest Fight. That's my one shilly promotion here. Trust people go out and have a read of it, but I'd love to talk to Diego about this, by the way, because it is about building this. And I think if you can think through how there's a data and future internet infrastructure that crypto and self-sovereign identity can build as a base layer, and create an innovation hub around that, rather than just say, own a lot of Bitcoin and turn Bitcoin into legal tender, I think you'll go a long way further, and you may actually start to get the international community to engage on these issues. So basically, look, I think, Argentina's problems are all about trust, and reconstructing that. And it's going to be essential that there's a runaround of this broken political system to do that. And there's probably few other people and countries in the world than Argentines who can figure out how to do that.
And so what are some of the crucial, critical building blocks, I think, as also Juan's put in the chat, that you think are needed? Like you've mentioned strong bonds, historical challenges, but really strong innovation and entrepreneurial proclivity, and becoming an innovation hub. What are those critical building blocks beyond that are needed for Argentina to sort of realize some of these opportunities?
Well, I mean, it is the right regulatory framework, right? I think it's so clearly, Diego was talking about open, innovation and making things like forming companies far more efficient. But I think, coming up with the right framework for for innovation in the context of how crypto still exists in this ambiguous world between securities laws and technical laws, technology. And I think that you know not sort of buying into sort of the we're all in with Gary Gensler and everything's a security structure is going to be critical. It has to be broad-based, and if there's sort of no way within the sort of American securities laws model that broad decentralized systems with tokens owned by the population can function if everybody has to be an accredited investor, or you've got to go through the machinations of a public company. So like really figuring out how to be a leader in that space, whether it's like, identifying a utility token concepts, creating safe harbors, models that actually allowed for collective ownership in the true form, I think are going to be, a really important regulatory base here. And then I think get that right and bring in larger companies as well that can participate in some way in all this. I think you have the formula because of the underlying sort of innovative verve that Argentina has.
Amazing. And if all of those things are in place, you're coming back to buy another house?
Yeah, for sure.
Fantastic. It's a brilliant story, and it was a really good podcast. I think that you and Aaron did on just how haptic and important this was for you, just on a personal level, and how you understood it in its historical, social, and economic context. Brilliant, Michael. Thank you very much for joining us. We're out of time.
Thanks for having me. I do have to run, but yeah, good stuff, guys. Keep me in the loop. Okay.
Appreciate it.
See you all.
Thank you very much, Michael. All the best.